You ready to start recording? There you go.
All right. Ready.
Okay. Thank you and welcome to this, the 10th presentation in the Fall 2021 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainability, and I'd like to welcome those of you here in the live audience, 255 Sykes, and those of you who are logged on for the Zoom presentation. We are excited that we have Professor Jen Chandler today to tell us about her research. Please enjoy today's presentation, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And then come back, we've got 2 more presentations next week and then the week after Thanksgiving break with Professor Scotty Reef-Snyder from Art Design and Professor Anita Foman from Communication. But without further ado, let me hand the stage over to Professor Chandler.
Thank you so much. And thank you folks both here and online for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the work that my lab's been doing that deals with differential escape of spotted lanternfly from 2 of the most commonly used trapping techniques, duct tape and sticky bands. So a very low-tech research program, but something that could have a lot of impact in application for landowners. And I'm going to attempt to use a laser pointer on the screen so that those of you who are watching virtually or watching the video can see what I'm pointing out as we go. So the work I'm going to be discussing was developed and implemented and reported on actually in a paper in the Great Lakes Entomologist in collaboration with 4 really bright, really talented undergraduate biology majors here at Westchester University. They did such great work that they are actually first authors on this paper. And so it may be even more appropriate for them to present, but you're stuck with me today. So I want to mention them by name because they were really just phenomenal. The first is Matt Desko. He was a biology major at Westchester. He's now working as a field research assistant in Utah. Carrie Scheibel is now working in a plant population biology lab at Temple. Unfortunately, Sam Silverman, I have lost contact with, but I'm sure she's doing amazing things because she was incredibly bright. And then Jessica Bickle, who is currently working on her master's in biology at Westchester. And she's following up on some different spotted lanternfly research in my lab. So really talented undergraduates who really made all of this possible. So before I dive into this specific work, I want to chat just a minute about spotted lanternfly generally. And for many of you, I'm sure you are well versed in spotted lanternfly, but there may be folks who have just moved to the area and have not experienced them now that our numbers in the region are down. So I want to chat about it, where it came from, how it's spread over the past several years. So this is spotted lanternfly that you see here. And it's an invasive plant hopper insect that is native to China. It's believed that spotted lanternfly egg masses, which you see over tons of different materials here, light bulbs and fabric and stone and wood. It's thought that the egg masses were brought over from China on a shipment of stone in 2012. And after being brought here, these first instar nymphs hatched out and began what we see today. So the first United States spotted lanternfly infestation was observed in Berks County, Pennsylvania in 2014 in a wooded area that was full of tree of heaven. So if you're not familiar, tree of heaven is an invasive species that we see here that's native to China that serves actually as spotted lanternfly host in its native range. So this series of infestation maps from 2018 to the present will give you an idea of the spread of spotted lanternfly. And just for reference, we're looking at states surrounding Pennsylvania, including New York, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And if you pay particular attention to the bright blue areas, these are counties where actual infestations of spotted lanternfly have been detected, so not just one-off sightings. So as you see, the invaded range of spotted lanternfly has increased fairly substantially over the past several years. Although we aren't seeing the severe infestations that we once saw around here, we've kind of like passed that buck on down, and now in real time, they're seeing those types of infestations in places like Winchester, Virginia, where I've done some extra work. So while we've only seen the spread to this extent so far, climate and habitat suitability models performed by other folks at other universities indicate that habitat suitability for spotted lanternfly exists throughout much of the United States. And so there's ample opportunity for range expansion. And that makes the work that we do, which I'll talk about in a moment, fairly important. So for those of you who might not be as intimately familiar with spotted lanternfly, here are a couple of figures. This one is showing the life cycle of a spotted lanternfly. And down here is showing the different morphologies of spotted lanternfly. So spotted lanternfly go through several separate life stages during their lifetime. They have 4 nymphal stages that you see here and 1 adult winged stage. These first instars that hatch out around like Mayish and June, depending on the conditions, are really small. And as the growing season wears on and progresses, the nymphs grow in size from first instar to second instar, third, fourth, and then adult, with the nymphs developing further and also becoming more physically powerful. You can see the first 3 instars are black with little white dots. They're easily recognizable that way. But when you get into 4th instars, they're red with white and black coloration. And I like compare those to Darth Maul in Star Wars, if any of you are Star Wars people. But these later instars, thinking about like 3rd, 4th instars and then adults, are far more capable than the early instars, both in terms of their mechanical power and in terms of the advanced development of their mouth parts, and that facilitates feeding. So speaking of feeding, spotted lanternfly feed using sucking and piercing mouth parts in order to access host plants' phloem sap. They are polyphagous, meaning that they can feed on various types of plants. They aren't necessarily host specific. And this lack of host specificity is particularly evident in the early instars. So again, in these black and white instars primarily. We've seen early instars feeding on a multitude of different species, and I'm looking at Noor, he sees them, I'm sure, all the time in the Gordon, but we see them on Virginia creeper and Oriental bittersweet and multiflora rose and grapes and hops. We even see these early instars on woody plants such as tree of heaven and black walnut and maple species, though when the early instars are on these woody plants, they're most often relegated to like leaves and petioles and really tender new growth because of their ill-developed mouth parts. Many plant species can support late nymphal stages and also adult spotted lanternfly, but we do most often see the heaviest accumulation of these individuals on tree of heaven. So it seems that early in their life cycle, they are far more generalist, but they trend toward tree of heaven toward the later life cycle. Spotted lanternfly also cover a lot of distance on their host plants. So as you see here, we have nymphal stages and we have adult stages. So both nymphs and adult spotted lanternflies exhibit this secular behavior where they climb up the length of their host, and they often fall or jump off in response to an obstacle or to a threat. When they fall off, they simply start reclimbing that host or another host that's nearby. So they're literally spending most of their lifetime on the body of these trees or these plants. And this behavior makes tree banding, so literally wrapping the trees with adhesive bands, a really popular technique for controlling spotted lanternfly because the bands are capable of intercepting those bugs as they move up and down the body of the host plant. So as y'all have walked or driven through town over the past several years especially, you've no doubt seen a multitude of trees that have been banded with adhesive tapes. And these traps are either like plain old duct tape, or oftentimes a commercially produced sticky band made for insect capture. And I have examples of both of those here. So commercially produced sticky bands are simply pieces of paper that are coated with a strong adhesive and are then wrapped around the trunk of a tree or some other part of a host plant with the adhesive side out. And then insects or other objects that come into contact with that adhesive are theoretically captured, and they eventually die on that band. Nevertheless, field observations do tell us that not every individual that comes into contact with this band is ultimately captured. Quite a few of them actually escape from the band. So while commercial sticky bands are often used in the field, there are many unknowns about this method, including how effectiveness varies, for example, as the life stages of the spotted lanternfly progress. The wrapping of trees with duct tape, of course, adhesive side facing out, was initially suggested by researchers at Penn State Extension as a cheaper alternative to the more expensive commercially produced sticky bands. But these experts did warn that the adhesive qualities of duct tape would diminish far more rapidly, especially in the presence of any sort of precipitation. So like commercial sticky bands, the actual effectiveness of duct tape, which is being used often by landowners, was largely unknown. And it was very likely that a lot of these landowners were employing this technique with little to no success, especially when we're dealing with later instars and adults. So the question becomes, are both of these bands useful? Are they effective against all life stages? And is one better than the other? And the whole purpose is that tree banding is such an easy tool for landowners to use in their fight against spotted lanternfly, but it's probable that this banding technique that they're using might not be being performed optimally, costing them a lot of money, a lot of time, and just producing an excess of waste, because this is nothing to scoff at. It produces a good deal of waste. So we hope that this study would shine some light on some techniques that might be optimal for reducing waste, reducing in terms of paper waste, time, and money, and also increasing the amount of spotted lanternfly that could be captured. So a lot of studies have compared the differences in the number of individual spotted lanternfly that are trapped on various types of sticky bands or other trapping techniques. But the problem is that the observed differences in the number of spotted lanternfly caught may be confounded by the level of infestation in a certain area or the number of individuals on a certain tree. Less is known about the actual probability of an individual escaping from a trap once that trap is encountered. And this is really important information that we need to know, especially when it comes to estimating population sizes based on trap counts. So my students and I developed some controlled laboratory experiments to answer some simple but relatively unexplored questions. The first question was, does the effect of adhesive type, so again, that's going to be commercially produced sticky bands and duct tape, on the probability of escape vary based on the life stage of the spotted lanternfly? And we predicted that commercially produced bands are going to be more effective than duct tape in all life stages. We then wanted to know, does the probability of escape vary based on life stage, regardless of the type of adhesive band used? So if pulled across all adhesive bands, how does life stage affect probability of escape? And we predicted that probability of escape across both of those band types would increase as the life stage increases. So the larger, more powerful individuals could escape better regardless of the type of band. Does the probability of escape differ between band type regardless of life stage? So again, pulled across all life stages, is there a difference in effectiveness of duct tape versus commercially produced sticky bands without regard to the stage of the insect? We predicted that even when brand new, duct tape is going to be inferior to the commercially produced band. And finally, we wanted to break it apart and say, does the probability of an insect's escape vary among life stages for each of those two adhesives separately? And I'll get to the point of this question later on in the presentation. But we predicted that the probability of escape on commercial bands is going to increase as the individuals get larger and more powerful, but that it's going to remain somewhat low across the board. And that the probability of escape from duct tape is going to remain high regardless of which life stage we're dealing with. So those are the 4 questions. And when I talk about the results, I'll talk about each separately because this is a lot of words and a lot of confusion. So we'll go through it one by one. So in the summer of 2019, my lab collected spotted lanternfly from throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. Due to the opportunistic nature of the study, we weren't able to collect enough first instars to include in the experiment, but we were able to incorporate a decent amount of replication for all other instars, as you can see here. So individuals were collected in mesh bags by my undergraduates, as you can see here, and they were transported back to the lab where they were held in mesh exclosures that contained fresh cuttings of tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima. And they were held for no longer than 24 hours because we didn't want to put undue stress on them. The upper portion of pieces of wood were wrapped completely in a strip of either the web coat commercially produced sticky band or professional grade duct tape. And that wood was oriented vertically inside of separate mesh enclosures. Web coat brand sticky bands were used because another study indicated that they were more effective in catching a larger number of spotted lanternfly than a clear packing tape, and also another brand of sticky wrappers. The duct tape used in this study was an industrial grade all-weather heavy duty HVAC duct tape with a rubber-based adhesive. And this particular tape surpasses the adhesive value of many of the really commonly used duct tapes that we found people using out in the field. But unfortunately, we only tested one type of duct tape, which looking back, we would have done a bit differently. So for each trial, a haphazardly selected individual was removed from the holding enclosure and its life stage was recorded. So in this example, you see a 4th instar individual. That individual was then released near the bottom of that wood plank, and it was allowed to climb upward toward the awaiting trap, either the web coat sticky bands or the duct tape. And once that individual encountered the trap and they started making their escape attempt, a timer was set for 2 minutes. And then that individual had 2 minutes to escape before we literally slammed the door shut on them. And this 2-minute time limit was established as the escape threshold based on a lot of previous trials where we allowed the spotted lanternfly to try to escape for far greater than 2 minutes. But we found in those trials that if they weren't able to escape in 2 minutes, they never escaped. Also, fresh strips of both adhesives were used for every individual trial, so for every individual bug, and the types of bands were alternated one after the other. Okay, so in order to answer the questions after we collected our data, we ran log likelihood analyses, and I'll just give you the results of each now. So just as a reminder, because I know that question slide was a little maybe daunting, the first question asks if the effect of adhesive type on the probability of escape varies based on life stage. So in other words, this is asking, does the pattern we see in the ability of these bugs to escape based on instar vary depending on which trap they were exposed to? So does the pattern of escape as they move from second instar to adult differ based on the type of trap? And we actually found that the effect of life stage on probability of escape did not differ based on the type of band used. So just to orient you to this table, on the left, we have life stage, 2nd, 3rd, 4th instars, and adults. Next, we have the percent of individuals that escaped from sticky bands and the percent of individuals that escaped from duct tape. And what we see is that for each life stage, The proportion of the individuals escaping was substantially greater when using duct tape than when using commercial sticky bands. So the pattern did not change there. We then broke that apart to ask the question, does the probability of spotted lanternfly escape vary based on life stages, regardless of the type of adhesive that's actually being used? And we found that yes, the probability of individuals escaping does depend on the life stage of that individual when pulled across all band types. So taking out that effect of band. So I just want to orient you to this figure because there's going to be a few like this, and they're somewhat confusing. So even to me, I like to get an orientation. So this y-axis represents the portion of individuals that either escaped or did not. In this one, the x-axis is the life stage of the individual. So second instar, third, fourth, and adult, with the width of each one of these bars proportional to the sample size for that life stage. The dark gray bars represent the proportion of individuals in that given life stage that were able to escape. And since we're going to focus on those, I've highlighted those in a different color. So for example, for second instars, the proportion of individuals that were able to escape was just below 50%. All right, and just a reminder, all of these data are pulled across both adhesive types. So the percentage of spotted lanternfly escaping from the adhesives were lowest in second instars. So again, just under 50% of second instars were able to escape. Similar among third and fourth instars, with about 63% of all third and fourth instars that were exposed to both of these adhesive types able to escape. And greatest in adults, with nearly 92% of all adults escaping. So in other words, this tells us that the probability of escape, regardless of which adhesive is used, is greater as the life stages progress, with a huge jump in adults being able to escape. We then answered the question, does the probability of spotted lanternfly escape vary based on the type of band used, regardless of the stage of the life stage of the bug? And we found that the probability of an individual escaping does depend on the adhesive when we pulled across all life stages. And so again, our y-axis represents the number of proportion of individuals that either escaped or did not. This time our x-axis is the adhesive type with sticky band over here and duct tape over here. And the dark gray represents the proportion of individuals that escaped that given sticky band type. So what we found was the percentage of spotted lanternfly escaping were way higher in duct tape. So about 92% of all individuals that were exposed to duct tape escaped, regardless of their life stage. It was substantially lower on the commercially produced sticky bands. So across all of the individuals that were exposed to sticky bands, only about 47% escaped. So this tells us that when life stages aren't necessarily considered, duct tape is really inefficient at capturing spotted lanternfly. In fact, almost every individual that crawled onto duct tape crawled off of duct tape. So it seems that first, adult spotted lanternfly tend to escape more frequently than other life stages generally. And it seemed like overall, duct tape did a really poor job at capturing individuals. So at this point, we had pretty much already lost hope for duct tape, period. But in order to inform appropriate ecologically minded banding protocols, we still needed to know, like, okay, what is the effectiveness of each of these band types separately in capturing the different life stages of spotted lanternfly? And this is important because it would help us narrow down a window of time during the season that's most appropriate to have these traps out. And the reason behind that importance, we'll talk about it a little bit later. So we split our data set up and we asked, does the probability of escape vary among life stages for each of the two types of adhesives used separately? And we ran separate log likelihood analyses. These figures are going to be set up similarly to the ones I showed before, but this time we're going to have one figure for commercial sticky bands and one figure for duct tape, so two separate figures. So let's look at sticky bands first. So what you're seeing on the y-axis is the proportion of individuals that either escaped or did not escape the sticky bands only. And along the x-axis, you see life stage. So this first analysis, which focused only on individuals that were exposed to the commercially produced web coat sticky bands, indicated that life stage does influence the probability of escaping from that commercially produced sticky band. The proportion of individuals that escaped from sticky bands increased as the life stages progressed. But I mean, it's really low in especially second instars and also third and fourth instars, where we see that marked increase is in adults. So the marked increase in escape is in the adults. Duct tape, on the other hand. So we're looking at the same thing now, but just escape from duct tape. We did find that life stage influences the probability of escape from duct tape, but escape from duct tape is really high regardless of what life stage you're in. So if you look here, 100% of adults that were exposed to duct tape were able to escape from it. And even looking at second instar individuals, the proportion of individuals, second instar individuals escaping duct tape is nearly as high as the proportion of adults that were able to escape commercial sticky bands. So what does this all mean and why? Well, all of these data tell us that duct tape is almost always an ineffective option for combating spotted lanternfly. Sticky bands, on the other hand, seem to be quite effective, particularly in the spotted lanternfly instar stages, not speaking of the adults. So placing web coat commercial grade sticky bands on trees when spotted lanternfly are in their early life stages, as opposed to adults, are going to result in an increased capture rate, consequently reducing the number of reproducing individuals that season. I do have to point out that this experiment was a controlled laboratory study. So this was all done inside nice climate controlled lab. So it really represents the best case scenario capture rates that we're likely to see. Field conditions, including temperature variations and precipitation patterns, and just the accumulation of debris like leaves and other dead insect carcasses, can really influence capture rates. So what we're seeing is best case scenario. So let's back it up just a little bit and talk about why this stuff really matters. So the feeding of spotted lanternfly on both native and invasive plants can be damaging, as we know, but also, frankly, it's just really gross. We have seen substantial economic impacts on the production of grapes and orchard trees and cultivated tree stock. And researchers are currently investigating the ecological impacts of spotted lanternfly on herbs and vines and trees in the woods and in fields. There's more research being done with that. Extensive feeding by large groups of spotted lanternfly, like you can see here, can lead to open wounds and the eventual wilting and death of individual limbs or branches, and also vines. Additionally, the sticky honeydew that's excreted from the posterior of the spotted lanternfly, it's basically just undigested sap. It falls onto lower vegetation, and it's readily colonized by something called sooty mold, which you can see here. And this sooty mold basically shades out leaves and decreases the photosynthetic ability of plants underneath it. So this has a lot of implication. And it's our hope, among other things, that information about the effectiveness of these very popular banding techniques, one that are used widespread, can better optimize some of the management protocols for these folks so that some of these threats are minimized as much as possible, but also so that they are done in a way that is cost and time efficient. So while the work I have presented here might seem very disconnected from what I'm going to talk about next, it actually was one of mine and my students' main motivations for doing this work, and that is to prevent unnecessary animal bycatch. So if anyone online or in person is sensitive to seeing like dead vertebrates, I just wanted to give you a bit of a trigger warning that you might want to turn away because there's going to be some on this slide. So bycatch of important pollinator invertebrates, birds, and mammals, including bats and squirrels, are really often reported when sticky bands have been used. The majority of those reports are in pollinators and invertebrate species, not the vertebrates. There is a way, though, to help prevent against vertebrate bycatch, and that's by wrapping the sticky bands in chicken wire, which basically provides a mesh barrier to prevent vertebrates from becoming permanently stuck to the barriers. It's not a perfect solution, but it does greatly reduce the loss of birds and the loss of mammals. Unfortunately, it does almost nothing to prevent the loss of pollinators, which I think is an equally, maybe more important issue. And you can actually see, I took a video out in the field that some of these very crafty spotted lanternfly are actually using the chicken wire as a bridge to get over the sticky. Of course, it's not many of them, and maybe those who do that deserve to live. But the use of chicken wire is often very helpful. Of the hundreds of tree bands that my lab has put out in the woods over the past several years, we have counted very little bird and mammal bycatch, but we've counted a multitude of bees and spiders and flies and all of these other really important pollinators. And with sticky bands, there's no way to prevent this. And that was really troublesome to us. So this study is important that it helped us gain an understanding of when certain adhesives were the most useful for capturing spotted lanternfly. And of course, that was early on in their life stages. With this knowledge, we can be strategic about when we place the sticky bands on trees and for what duration, in hopes that we can limit the exposure of important pollinators and birds and mammals to these bands simply as a function of the amount of time they're deployed. So taking this out to a broader sense, a recent study done at another university focused on the effectiveness of several different types of trapping mechanisms by quantifying differences in spotted lanternfly catch. So they weren't looking at the probability of escape, they were simply looking at differences in catch. So they compared our web coat sticky bands, which is what we used in this study, to bug barrier traps. And these are traps that are held about 1 to 2 inches off of the trunk of a tree with the adhesive surface facing inward. And this is nice because it helps prevent vertebrate bycatch. You're not getting a bunch of vertebrates stuck to that adhesive, though it's not perfect in preventing pollinator bycatch. They also compared circle trunk traps, which were originally developed for pecan weevils, but which have been modified for spotted lanternfly. And these are kind of great because they have virtually no vertebrate bycatch. I've actually never heard of an instance where a vertebrate has been caught in this. And they actually reduce the number of pollinators that are being caught. So this seems like a great alternative. So this separate study found that the number of early instar, first through third instar spotted lanternflies caught in these traps did not differ among the three, all the same. But late instar and adults catch was a little bit better in the bug barrier tree trap and substantially better in the commercial circle trunk traps. So this is fantastic because this is giving us a way to, number one, catch more spotted lanternfly, but number two, cut down on bycatch, which is a really important thing that's always in the back of my mind. So what's the problem with this? Well, problems with the bug barrier band is that number one, it's very expensive, almost so expensive that a normal landowner might not be able to afford to deploy a lot of them. And if they're not tended to well, they tend to fail because they are not tightly affixed to the trunk of a tree. And so when they start sliding down, they become pretty much wholly ineffective. With the circle trunk traps, they are also incredibly expensive if bought online. But luckily, Penn State Extension has put blueprints for making your own on their website, so that's always a possibility. Nevertheless, either way you go with these, commercial or DIY, they still take a lot of time to make or to actually put up in the woods, so they're time consuming. So I think a lot about how work that's being done affects like real people that are out in their yards or in their forests trying to track these spotted lanternfly. So when deciding which trapping method to use, landowners have to consider the quantity of trees they have that need to be banded or trapped, and also the monetary and time investments that go into each types of these traps. It seems that our typical web coat sticky bands wrapped in wire mesh are viable. They're cheap, they're easy, and they're quick, and they reduce population numbers. But we know they're not as useful later in the season. Other traps, like the bug barrier trap and the circle trunk trap, are effective later in the season, even more effective, but they're way more expensive and way more time consuming than typical sticky bands. So I propose that landowners consider a hybrid approach wherein relatively cheap and easy web coat sticky bands are deployed on a diverse array of species early in the season, where they can effectively capture early instar generalist spotted lanternfly, so the ones that are just widespread on a lot of species. And then as host preference trends toward tree of heaven later in the season, landowners can target fewer trees with a fewer number of these more expensive, more time-consuming traps that happen to be more effective against the late instars. And we see several benefits to this hybrid approach. So this approach or something similar might be the most time-effective and cost-effective option for landowners that still want to get good work done. This hybrid approach will maintain or most likely increase spotted lanternfly capture rates. And maybe most importantly, the substantially reduced occurrences of vertebrate and invertebrate pollinator bycatch will occur just as a function of not having these more, I guess, dangerous sticky bands out year round by really tailoring that landowner's approach to spotted lanternfly capture. So with that, I'm going to thank a few people, USDA APHIS, who is funding a lot of the work that I'm doing, as well as the Westchester RAWA grant, which allowed me to take the time to work with these undergraduate students as they prepared this paper. And of course, my fantastic undergraduate students, which I've already mentioned. So with that, I will take any questions y'all might have.
Can I just say, when you hear a question,
Sure.
Not to show a lot.
Absolutely. Yes, Nora.
So the circle trunk tracks that you showed both look like they were, horticultural size. Are they available with larger size? And I guess this tree and
Yeah, so that was a good question. Just repeating what Nora asked. When looking at these, and I'll go back, at these circle trunk traps, Nora mentioned that the ones we're looking at look like they're horticultural size, those for smaller diameter trees. And he asked if there are other options that might fit a larger diameter tree. The last time I looked, which has not been very recently, there were, I think, 3 sizes that you could purchase commercially. But that blueprint that's on Penn State Extensions for building your own can be scaled up. I think the biggest issue is making sure when you affix either like a bottle is one of the things they suggest, or a plastic bag to the top, just make sure it's affixed and the size appropriate.
Tree of heaven is a non-native. Would there be a lanternfly control impact of taking down tree of heaven?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So Brad asked, he made the statement, tree of heaven is an invasive. And so would there be some effect on spotted lanternfly if you controlled for tree of heaven, right? Took down tree of heaven. And the answer is yes. And the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has been, in my opinion, absolutely incredible in the amount of tree of heaven removal that they're doing. And I know that Virginia has really, were so proactive on trying to get it taken care of as well. But they're using techniques such as a trap tree technique, where they leave one to several, depending on the size of the area, tree of heaven up and remove the rest so that the bulk of the spotted lanternfly are attracted to that individual and can be dealt with and taken care of that way. Yeah, good question. Any more?
This all seems to be mechanical capture techniques. I would imagine chemical companies would be looking for an opportunity to encourage more pesticide spraying. Is that happening in commercial crop areas? Would your recommendations be a way to reduce the amount of chemicals sprayed into the environment by improving mechanical capture?
Yeah, so that was a good question. Brad asked, basically, are there chemical mechanisms like pesticides that are being used to treat spotted lanternfly? And would mechanical removal, like what I've been speaking of, be a good way to like offset some of that chemical spraying? So the answer is yes, there are chemicals, both systemic and contact spray chemicals, that are currently being used for spotted lanternfly. And if you had asked me 3 days ago, the active ingredients, I could have said them, but now there's no chance. But there are 2 active ingredients in the systemic pesticide that are very typical, and I'm not sure about the contact spray. And they are used. I guess I'm always of the opinion, like if there's an effective way to do it mechanically that's not causing a lot of damage and that's not introducing pesticides into, like you said, the surrounding into waterways, like that's what I'm always going to go with. And I think for landowners, at least, the cost of wrapping trees with bands and wrapping some chicken wire around those is a lot less prohibitive than having a company come out and introduce pesticides either by contact or systemically. So I don't know if that's a great answer. Perhaps the combination of the 2 is what is really beating the population. Any other questions? Amy, are we good with the questions there? Oh, sorry, we have one more here.
Have you seen the curious on the numbers of population? Seeing the impact of these efforts and numbers fluctuated in the last, I don't know, 5 years?
Oh, yes. So the numbers, especially this year, last year to an extent, but this year, it's almost like they have tanked in this area. And so I'm sure Noor and Brad have seen this too. What we used to see was just, I mean, what looked like swarms of spotted lanternfly, especially in any area that had standing tree of heaven, and even in areas that had fallen tree of heaven that had already been cut. And just the past couple of growing seasons, I've seen a huge reduction. But I've also been going down to Winchester, Virginia to do research, and it's like what we got rid of, they picked up. I mean, not literally, it's not the same bugs, but those populations are booming. So it's almost like a wave is pushing the larger populations. And I don't know the reasons. Like, yeah, I think folks are doing a great job with mitigation around here. So I'm sure that has something to do with it.
And when the wave has passed and population seems to be lower, is it as of much concern, both for homeowners who are just concerned about the ickiness of having a bunch of bugs around, and for agricultural producers?
Good question. So, and I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat your question, but Brad asked, as we're seeing the wave like move on, is that a good sign basically for landowners who don't like the ickiness and also for commercial producers? I hope so. I don't know. I don't know what it means that the front has passed us. I don't know if we're going to see something later on. I'm just not sure.
Jim, we've got a question here in the chat from Sarah, asking if there's any evidence of birds eating the spotted lanternflies, and would that contribute to the population decline?
Yeah, so there is evidence. I don't work in that realm, so I don't know like the hard numbers, but folks have sent me, including my grad students, have sent me pictures of like, I think a cardinal once attacking a spotted lanternfly and other birds. I don't know if they're actually eating them or just attacking them. I don't know what's up. They were killing them. So like, do we release a ton of birds and make the world a more peaceful place? Absolutely. I don't know the extent of that effect though. Nora, do you know what any other birds that you've seen eating them?
I don't think I've ever seen a bird eating a spotted lanternfly. I've seen fungus.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think I've ever personally seen a bird eat one either, but I have seen pictures of it happening. So it's like my best friend's best friend's best friend has shown me a picture, right? All right, any other questions?
This might be a question for both of you, since you're both very active in the GNA. Once this wave has passed, do you have a sense of how large an impact, negative or positive, that the presence of a smaller population of lanternflies will be in a place like the Gordon Natural Area? Do we worry about it, or is it just now part of the large number of invasive species that exist there?
So I'm going to repeat that, and then Nora, I'm going to let you, as the GNA master, take that one. So Brad asked both me and Nora, now that we're seeing this wave of spotted lanternfly pass, what will this remnant, like small population in the Gordon Natural Area do? Is it what are some of the negative or positive even impacts that we might look for in the future?
Well, one thing that's happened at the Gordon is much of the tree of heaven's dead. And so I think.
And that's because of the lanternfly?
Yeah. And it's so big, I haven't seen any sign of root sprouting. Dead trees. So I think that element's just changed. I mean,
Is that possible?
that depends on what comes in those gaps.
Yeah.
And then the biggest worry at the Gordon is, for me, has been last fall we saw a lot of adult lanternflies on red maple, and particularly in area G3, so south of Tag Road, west of Goose Street. And looking around this year, I didn't see any signs in the canopy that suggest that they have been affected by that, which is kind of surprising. As many adults that are out there on those trees.
Yeah, my thoughts on that. So if you can't hear online, Nora was saying that he saw late in the season a lot of spotted lanternfly on red maple. I saw it too, and I was actually speaking to someone a couple of years back from a pesticide company, and he was saying that once the ailanthus starts nesting for the season, a lot of the adults move to red maple, and they're doing less feeding and more egg laying. And so maybe it's that the eggs are hatching out, but those first insars are like traveling to nearby vines or things they can actually stick their proboscis through to feed. And so maybe they aren't getting the bulk of the damage. I don't know. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's plenty of the area where we saw them on heavily on the red maple, there's plenty of climbers.
Yeah. Cool.
Stuff and families.
Mhm.
Great.
Nice.
Well,
Awesome.
we're past 12:50 and we normally stop at this point. So please join me in thanking Professor Chandler for coming today. And for those of you online, please join us next week.
Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen. That was awesome.
See ya, Amy.
Bye. See you soon.